Hi, you're watching India Post Live, India's first web TV news conversation. You can join the conversation by logging on to our website, indiapostlive.com, or you can also tweet with us by using the hashtag IndiaPostLive. Today, the conversation is about Indonesia and India, both countries going to the elections. Now, India and Indonesia are politically and culturally quite interlinked. The relationship dates back to the Ramayana and also to long-term maritime trade. Now, at a time when both countries are waiting for new governments, while Indonesia went to the polls on the 9th of April, India is still in the 5th phase. Let's look at what the two nations really have in common.
India and Indonesia enjoy an extensive economic and cultural relationship. The two countries are dominated by a single community, Muslims in Indonesia and Hindus in India, and yet diverse and multi-ethnic. There is corruption on both sides by long-serving parties in the government. Now, as both nations await new leaders, the markets are rallying on hopes that the new government will be able to address fiscal imbalances and push economic growth. Indonesia will announce election results between 7th and 9th May, while India on the 16th of May. What is in store for the two countries?
Remember, you can also join in on the conversation by logging on to our website or tweeting with us. But joining us in studio from the Indian perspective is former Ambassador Rajiv Dogra. And from Jakarta, we have Kartika Chandra, who's with the Tempo magazine, an investigative magazine in Indonesia. Kartika, just coming to you, from an outside India perspective, what is the process of the election in Indonesia? Because I believe that there is a two-phase process. Right now, the parliamentary phase,
Yes.
and then a presidential election in 3 months from now.
Yes, exactly. We have just finished the parliamentary election a week ago, on 9 April to be exact. And back then, we chose the parliamentary member. It's 500 something of parliamentary member for central parliament and the district parliament. And then we're going to have presidential elections on next July 9th. And there we will be voting for who is going to be our next president. So it's a two-way process. At first, we have the parliamentary elections, and only parties who hold enough voters can choose their presidential candidates to go for presidential elections on July.
And I believe that there seems to be a wave of anti-incumbency. There's a Democratic Party struggle, which was formerly headed by Megawati Sukarnaputri. The candidate there is seen as a front-runner. Is there a new wave? Is there a sense that there is a clear mandate?
Well, actually, there has been debate on these issues because we have this Jakarta governors who is very popular for these past few years because he has been very successful to as a governor in the central Java, in one of the cities in central Java. But and then inside the Democratic Struggling Party itself, there has been a wide debate whether they have to go with this governor or they should go with the chief of the parties. Then I think for now it's very clear that the party is quite solid, although with some internal problems. But it's obvious that the governor will be running for will be running for presidential election with the support from the party and the other two parties right now. So they have built a coalition. So now they have saved their place for the July election.
All right. Ambassador Dogra, of course, there's a vast difference. It's 60 years versus 16 years, tryst with parliamentary democracy. But the relationship goes back many, many years, apart from the cultural ties as well, politically, over the non-aligned movement as well.
Well, I think there are many similarities between Indonesia and India. Both are very large democracies. India is the biggest. Indonesia is, I think, the fourth largest democracy in the world. Uh, the names have common roots. India and Indonesia are not too far apart. Indo comes from India, I'm told. The currency is the same, rupee and rupiah. Uh, the aspirations of people are similar. Last 5 years, Indonesia's biggest complaint has been corruption. And we aren't too far apart on that score either. What is different in terms of the election process is that despite being equally long, presidential election in Indonesia is excruciatingly long. I mean, finally the votes will take place in July, and if a candidate does not get 50%, then there's a runoff again. But what is dissimilar, and very importantly so in favor of Indonesia, is that the regional parties do not get to have a role, because to become a candidate for the president,
You have to get a certain proportion of the national election.
20%.
Absolutely.
20% of the seats must belong to your party or a coalition of your parties. Otherwise, 25% of the national vote. So that rules out literally the small parties and the regional parties. So while we have a lot of similarities, we also have subtle differences. And I think in this respect, Indonesians are doing better. They've chosen better. As far as the candidates are concerned, again, there's a very interesting similarity. The governor of Jakarta, which our guest from Indonesia was referring to, is supposed to be a very dynamic person.
Absolutely.
And the general, who's the other candidate, is supposed to be a go-getter and a doer.
Right.
So there again, I think you'll find some reflection in the candidates here. Both, and more importantly, I think both Indonesian voter and the Indian voter is aspirational in terms of the percentage. The youth forms a large proportion.
Under 30s.
That's right. So I would wish Indonesia luck, because I think there's a lot we can do together.
Now, Kartika, you represent an investigative magazine. And, Ambassador Dogra pointed out something in terms of similarity. The issue of corruption, I believe Transparency International did a survey where most Indonesians viewed Parliament as one of the most corrupt institutions. Do you think this election will change that?
Well, we have a great hope on that, because and actually because of that corruption issues, many of people in Indonesia have chosen not to get involved in parliamentary elections, because they think they don't have any more trust on the parties and also on the parliamentary members. So they decided not to use their vote for these elections. But then they said that they will not choose party, they will not choose parliamentary member, but they will go to vote on the presidential elections, because they have such a great hope to this Jakarta government, and that we have so much. We believe that this guy probably can make the situations better and can work better towards the corruptions issues.
And what about the concern that if, as Ambassador Dogra was saying, that, because of the representational nature of the election before you go to the presidential phase, a lot of regional parties may not be represented. What about the concern that there'll be a lot of horse trading if they don't make that percentage? A lot of them coming together, behind the scenes maneuvering.
Yes, exactly. That is very true, actually. So at the beginning, the Democratic Struggle Party planned not to build a coalition, because they have very much confidence that they will gain the 20% electoral threshold for presidential elections. But then, according to the quick count recently, they don't get 25% voters minimum. They only get 20%. So that's why they have to build coalitions with other parties. And because of that, it will be difficult for them to independently move forward with their candidates. For example, they have to bring their vice president candidates from other parties, which is there we might see
Bit of horse trading.
some. Yes,
Okay.
exactly.
All right. Ambassador Dogra, apart from the cultural and sort of, the linkages that exist, economically too, I think global investors are watching both countries quite closely because both have been put on the watch list as fragile countries. That there is a view that with the elections, perhaps there'll be a more decisive phase and more conducive phase. Is that a correct assessment?
Well, I think Indonesia, like India, has a huge potential. It's rich in mineral resources, all kinds of natural resources, and it has a very intelligent manpower, or human power, let's put it that way. And it has a GDP of $1 trillion. So that's not too far behind India's nearly $2 trillion GDP. So both India and Indonesia that way can become the engines of at least Southeast Asia, if not entire Asia. But together with China, maybe these three countries can become engines of growth for the next 10 years or 20 years. So I think international investors have reason to watch the elections carefully, because if they have decisive leaders, then the road ahead is very good. But if they do not have decisive leaders, then I think the countries suffer. But my confidence is that these elections, both for Indonesia and in India, are going to be positive and going to be definitive.
All right. And Kartika, what about the religious parties? Because here in India, we are seeing somewhat of the center-right coming back. But in Indonesia, what is the situation with the religious parties that are also in the fray? How strong are they being viewed from an opinion poll perspective?
The interesting part is that even though Indonesia is probably the largest democratic with Muslim community, but the religious parties is not doing very well in this election, because most of them are in the middle of the quick count position. And let's say the biggest religious political party now is a Nation Rising Party. It is on the fourth line of the quick count results, and but after them, after this party, there is three other Islamic parties, and they get like between 6 to 7%. And although they're not gaining much voters, but the main party, like Democratic Struggle Party, rely on them to get much voters to get the tickets for the presidential elections, because they still think that this party is very popular, and if they want to get more voters, then they should go to the religious parties instead of going to the other nationalist parties. But speaking of policies, I don't think the religious party have more power to decide on the next elections.
All right. And Ambassador Dogra, of course, India is a lot more self-assured in terms of the federal union. Indonesia has seen a bit of churn when it comes to East Timor and Aceh. So that would actually determine where religion and all the larger issues really come in when it comes to the election as well, wouldn't it?
Well, I think Indonesia was a little unfortunate in terms of East Timor and Aceh, but there were a lot of geopolitical and strategic interests involved. So I won't blame it on Indonesians, but on many other issues. But in terms of human rights issues, which sometimes lead to these things, I think one of the candidates has been accused of human rights violations, the principal hint being towards the general, who's one of the candidates in the presidential elections in Indonesia. But that apart, I think sometimes we tend to underemphasize the importance of the social media today.
Absolutely.
Like your channel just now, uh, it reaches across, it builds bridges across continents, across nations, and it has an auto mechanism to check aberrations. So while a situation like Ukraine and so on is still possible, but the news travels faster.
Absolutely.
And news has a self-healing mechanism. So I wonder whether Aceh would be possible today. I wonder whether any aberration is possible at all in India. So I am not too worried about these extreme views or extreme influences having a major role either in India or in Indonesia in terms of the present elections or immediately thereafter.
And Kartika, that's an important point Ambassador Dogra raised. I believe the Indonesian elections is also a large part of it is about the social media. There's a lot of buzz on Facebook and Twitter about the issues involved, about candidates. Is that going to be a game changer as well? Because you have a much younger population voting.
Yes, yes. What happened? What happens here is that now there is a movement between the young people that they spread these tendencies to encourage the young people to vote because during the late 90s, there is a growing movement to do otherwise. So they said you better not to vote because we have no one to vote. There is no professional candidates and so on and so on. So, but now the situation is different. They say that if you want to change this country, if you want to contribute more on this country, you have to vote, and they do this movement through social media. So during election, there was so many hashtags around Twitter or Facebook stating that I did vote today, and then they take pictures and they post it on Twitter and Facebook. But I'd like to comment on what the ambassador said regarding one of the candidates who has issues with human rights violations. The thing about these young people is that they were born on late 90s, which means they do not know the situations back then. They do not know about the human rights violations, and this has not been taught in school also. So that's why the former general gained so many voters. Also, the party gained so many voters during the elections because I think many people are not aware of what he did in the past.
And interesting
But-
because interesting, Ambassador Dogra, because the young population now forms a very influential part of the Indian electorate as well, and a lot of similarities as well. The consciousness, the demand is now to be voting on the issues at hand and not the rhetoric. Do you see a similarity there as well?
Well, there are two things. One, what your guest from Indonesia mentioned, that in 90s, young people didn't want to vote because they thought it wouldn't make any difference. Number one, there's a huge attitudinal change amongst the young people in India because of what happened over the last 1 year with Anna Hazare and so on, where they felt that they could be instruments of change. So they are going to vote, and we have seen in the last few phases of the elections that the voting proportion has gone up by 10 to 15%, which
Absolutely.
is amazing.
And the selfies she was talking about, the Twitter, the Facebook, the encouragement to go out and vote has become a whole new movement as well.
So one, young people are becoming more confident that yes, both in Indonesia and in India and in other parts of the world, that yes, they should vote because it is their right, and B, that they can make a difference if they vote. The other thing is that because young people are participating, I think, and it is a subject for some researcher to investigate, I think there is a very important difference which will come in the electoral process.
Absolutely.
That now issues rather than candidates only will become primary. And yet another factor, in India's case, I don't know so much about Indonesia in this sense, that caste and religion, while they will continue to be important, but they will not have the same kind of primacy which they used to have in the last elections and the ones before.
Absolutely.
So I think the youth's entry is going to bring in qualitative changes which we do not realize immediately because it is happening in front of us.
Right.
So I suppose
So for the new historians to document and say, look, this was a changing point or a turning point as well. And Kartika, from an Indonesian perspective, how are the Indian elections being viewed? Because it is one of perhaps the largest and most elaborate processes anywhere in the world. 9 phases over so many weeks.
Yeah. Actually, we think that it must be a very huge process there, and we believe that if India, with such a big population, the big potentiality in economies and in everything, can do well in the election, then we must have do well also. But the thing that we learned so much from the Indian election process because we face the same problem, especially corruption, and there has been a lot of discussion on what can we learn from the process in India so far.
And also, Ambassador Dogra, there have been instances over the last few decades where you've been part of the diplomatic mission where there have been these missions to work with similar governments like Indonesia to look at electoral process and look at best practices. How much of an engagement has there been with countries like Indonesia?
Well, Indonesia specifically, I do not know in terms of the immediate engagement, but I can give you instances of elections, whether they are in Nepal or now in Afghanistan, Maldives, and so on. Many countries in Africa, many countries in Southeast Asia, especially the newly emerging countries from like Vietnam and Cambodia, where we certainly sent our election commission officials and to advise them to participate, even to send the ballot boxes or electronic voting machines. But in some cases, we also participated actually in drafting of the constitution.
Right.
So right from A to Z of the election process and of the democratic process, India has participated and India has sort of shared its experience, good or bad, with other countries. And I think in some ways, as they say, that you should have technology which is suited to your climate and your conditions and your people. In a way, developing countries sharing knowledge with each other on democratic process and electoral process is much better than transplanting it from a totally different environment which may be far too cold for our experience.
Kartika, interesting about the electoral process. I have a friend who's reporting out of Jakarta, and her big question was that apparently Indonesia is a step ahead in terms of allowing Indonesians around the world to also vote online. Did that work well this time?
Well, yeah. The election commission has tried to do that, but it's actually it's not doing very well in that terms because not all the voting place has the same infrastructure for that. But and I think but the most important thing is that the commission has tried to make the voting process easier, so it allowed more people to use their voting rights without any bureaucratic burden. Like if you are outside your area, you can just come to the voting place and show your ID cards, and then you can just vote. Usually, it didn't happen 5 years ago. at the previous election. So many people cannot just easily use their voting rights. But today, the commission has made it easier for them to go and vote.
No, and I was asking about Indonesians living abroad and being given the chance to also vote online.
It's not actually. The process is not. It's not really online, but they try to make the
Embassies.
yes. They try to make how to control the voters. They do it online, but the voting process itself it's not yet online.
Okay, that was an interesting discussion we had, Ambassador Dogra, last time about why NRIs are not being given newer technology tools like online voting. And I remember then being told that the Election Commission was worried that since India is such a larger, more diverse country, it would be difficult to do so. But Indonesia somehow managed to work around that. Do you think it's feasible in the Indian context?
Well, I think let's put both the elections in context. 900 million voters in India
Right.
is larger than the entire population of Europe.
Sure.
180 million voters of Indonesia is probably 4 times larger than the voting population of UK, or 2 times larger than the voting population combined of UK and France. So both in cases of Indonesia and India,
Magnitude is different.
the magnitude is enormous. But having said that, I think what Indonesia is doing, from what she told, that a voter can go to any constituency, show his or her card, identity card, and vote. So that by itself is a huge step forward. We still can't do it in India. Now, in terms of citizens abroad voting by postal ballot, I think that's the most likely scenario. That is the next step we are thinking of in terms of Indians settled abroad. But as it is, the exercise is so huge,
Complex.
stretching into 1 month, that getting the postal ballots back into India and then counting them may delay the entire process by another month or so. So I think there are practical difficulties which have to be weighed against the desirability of extending the process further. So that is what is holding it back.
So Kartika, we'll let you have the last word on the show. I think from an Indonesian perspective, are you optimistic of a decisive vote, and therefore when we go into the next 3 months into the presidential phase, that it will be all smooth sailing?
Yes, I'm very optimistic about that, and because we have a very great candidates from the new generations, and also from the old generations, and the fact that the previous election 1 week ago ran very smoothly and very safely, and that's the most important part. And I think because Indonesia is the largest country in the region, that if anything happen here in safe condition, then it will be very good for the economy and for the also for the broader situation for the region. And I think that is also the most important thing for India.
Yes. Thank you so much, Kartika Chandra from Temper Magazine in Jakarta, for joining in via Skype on India Post Live. And thank you so much, Ambassador Dogra, for being here in our studios and sort of putting perspective on this large exercise of elections both in India and in Indonesia. So continue watching India Post Live, and you can also join in on the conversation. Continue tweeting with us. #India Post Live. Thank you for watching.